Welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI, the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first non-profit industry association committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. Actionable ESG Talk series bring together great minds to discuss the current state and future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. I'm delighted to be here with our special guest. Today, actually, we're bringing together the experts in standardization, working very closely on a new standard called the Sustainable Request for Information. It is a standard that is proposed by AKFI Sustainability Association to solve and to address a critical problem in the communications between customers and their supply chain. I have to add that these are both mandated by legislation and requirements from different compliance bodies, as well as the standard will help with the strategy and the development of really a efficient communication between suppliers and their customers. Last thing to say is that this prepares actually for artificial intelligence to work properly in the context of suppliers and their customers in terms of sustainability. So welcome, Andy and Jacques. Please take a couple of seconds to introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Nicol. I have had a couple of different career phases, primarily in the technology and general business areas, but I've always been involved in standards of one type or another. However, what brought my interest in actionable ESG is the fact that through my technical career, I've been involved a lot on standards, and more recently, I've been a cybersecurity and privacy practitioner. And one of the big challenges is supply chain management. And that comes through in cybersecurity. And some of the lessons learned there is we have to be very precise about what data shared, under what conditions, and so on. And secondly, I've done a lot of work, especially as a mentor, and I also helped to found an accelerator program for green energy and blue technologies. And through that mentoring program, I've engaged a lot of companies in that space and became very aware and very interested of sustainability as an issue. And obviously, as we all know, there's regulations around that. And a lot of those issues around sustainability are to do with supply chain. So through this, I got very involved, reached out to Manuel, and have since been collaborating with Manuel and Jack on this foundational document and standard around actionable ESG. So that's my 1 minute, Manuel. I hope that was good, and looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect, Andy, and I'm turning on to Jacques for an introduction.
Thank you, Manuel. I'm Jacques Flouet, and I'm currently retired, but worked a lot in telecom for probably over 30 years in all kinds of mission-critical applications. And for the last 6 years, I worked with the TIA, which is a standard development organization. So basically working on standards and defining what's the best way to deploy certain products and also to how to design them. I've been involved in sustainability a little bit by the side as it became a hotter and hotter issue over the last few years. And people keep on asking us for more information about how to implement the sustainability in their products and also in the applications using the products. And that's kind of always been more like a guesswork so far. And I think people are looking for a very precise framework that they could apply and adapt to whatever they're needing. And that's one of the reasons I'm helping on this program, to bring a little bit of my standard development expertise, but also bring a little bit of the perspective I have from the industry on what they're needing. Thank you.
And thank you, Jacques. Thank you. And I should mention that SRFI takes you out of retirement. So without thank you very much both for introductions, and let's dive right in. Why sustainability reporting requires standards, and why precisely we embark together on this initiative to look at the supply chain and their customers and the need of standards, a missing piece in the bigger piece of sustainability. So Jacques, would you like to start?
Yes. Okay, so sustainability reporting standards are really critical, as people want to understand what they need to do and what they need to report on. I think everybody has an idea of what sustainability is in their mind, what it includes and what it excludes, but it's not necessarily a common view. And it depends sometimes on the industry. It depends also a lot on what they're currently measuring, rather than, what they might need in the future. So having a standard would basically help to provide the framework I talked about previously, to make sure that everybody is aligned, and we can also assess various proposals, for example, on products and on their sustainability aspect of it, and be able to compare more apples with apples.
Thank you. And actually, Andy, I'd like you to add on this, but I think between the introductions and now, the term precision comes as a theme for a good standard development. So with your experiences in standards, Andy, how do you see the sustainability reporting standards, and why they are so important for business success?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of threads there. Firstly, with any regulation or law or any reporting requirement, you have to be quite precise. And so having a common language around that and a common set of requirements is very important. One thing I learned in the technical cybersecurity world is you have to be very precise, because we're a very interconnected world, and supply chains become very important. So when you're producing a report attesting to your assurance of security or attesting to your sustainability, you're relying on information from a supply chain, right? From a business perspective, I think it's not just a case of meeting a standard. It's really positioning yourself as a good corporate citizen in terms of doing sustainability. You're doing your part to make sure your business, your products, your services are sustainable. And that is somewhat appealing to end users, right? So I think generally, it's partly a business reality of having to report to standards, but it's good customer positioning as well. And internally, procedurally, having some standard in place for supply chain and reporting around that is extremely important.
Thank you, Andy. And maybe a follow-up question. What is the role of standards in strategy in business? Because we're very well in sustainability. Most standards are actually for reporting, which really looks at past history. But when you look at business operations, really the challenge for business is to look at the future, not so much at the past.
Mhm. So, from a business perspective, having a standard on generally is very important because it allows you. Most businesses rely upon repeatable processes to produce a standard, to produce a product, to produce a service. You know, a lot of scalability requires standardization of your processes, right? And your finances and your production operations and so on and so on. So in a world where you're presenting a product or a service to a large set of customers and want to scale that, having standardizations around that product or service is very important to allow you to scale up and do that efficiently, effectively, and cost effectively.
Thank you, and absolutely. And on top of mind of executives today, there is AI, artificial intelligence. I'm not sure if everybody agrees on what it is, but we all love it. So, this being the case, I've been asked many times the question why SRFI is a standard about information, not AI. And Jacques, maybe could you explain why information comes before data and AI comes after data is ready?
Yes, I can give it a shot. AI for me is a tool that analyzes the data. Okay. So we all know that garbage in, garbage out. So the first thing is really about first defining what you need to, what kind of information you need, then identifying the data that could provide details about this type of information that you need. And then AI is definitely something that can really, really help to aggregate this data and make some sense out of it to help you provide, get the, I would say, actionable information at the end. Okay. So for me, that's really the sequence. But AI by itself is like, it's just a tool. It's a way to have pretty much a subject matter expert and even more, kind of a supercharged subject matter expert available all the time. But you still need the data to start everything.
So I think, yes, please, Anne. I was going to ask you to
answer that a little bit just to reinforce that. In my cybersecurity practice and privacy practice, I've been looking a lot at AI and using it quite extensively. And the number one, as Jacques mentioned, it's having solid data and data quality. Without that, and without the context around it, AI can give you very generic answers and can even hallucinate unless you have extremely quality data, you have the context behind it, and so on. So what you find, a lot of the smart companies are using AI incrementally to build on perhaps a business process they have and improving that because they already have the solid process, they have the data around that, and they can use that to improve that or use AI to improve that overall. But just launching AI at a business and trying to improve everything all at once is not a winning strategy. And it brings us back to one of the things about sustainability, and that is unless we have a defined set of requirements, some definitions, a common glossary for everybody to use, a common set of data, some high-level workflows, that's what's going to make the application of AI for actionable ESG very important. And that's why standardization is so important in the ASG world, ESG world, not ASG world.
Thank you. And I just maybe want to summarize. AI is only as good as data, as Jacques said, garbage in, garbage out. And data is as good as the agreement between people and companies. And this is where we need a standardized way to exchange information between people before we can translate this information into data, which in turn can we can turn the AI then to analyze it, come up with insights and so on, which are the good things AI can do today. But what we find in our research in AKFI is actually the gap is between the communication between the customers and their suppliers. We have multiple suppliers that serve multiple customers. So each of the customer has different sustainability agenda, different sustainability objectives, strategies. So until these are aligned, AI is not going to solve the problem. It's not going to close the gap of human communications and corporate communications. So thank you very much. I think you both touched on this. And Andy, I know you work quite a lot on defining the SRFI phases of implementation. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight.
So perhaps to cover both of how it came together, how it's architected, and on what the process is behind that. I think when we looked at this situation, we realized we needed a few things in a standard to make it work. All right. Firstly, it was building a common language around that, and coming up with a common set of questions that can be applied in a transaction between a customer and a supplier. And standardizing this firstly means you can chain this together because obviously a customer relying on one supplier, that supplier also relies on other suppliers. So trying to standardize and define that transaction and have it repeatable down the chain would help to solve the global problem of supply chain trust, right? In the ESG world, similarly in other business focuses. So defining that transaction was one thing with a common set of questions around that. Now, one realization from a business aspect is that all businesses are different. We're in different types of businesses. We're manufacturing tires for the auto industry. We're providing clothing from textiles sourced from various places in the world and made in various places in the world. So lots of different industries, all have developed the common set of requirements. So what we tried to do in the standard is architect it in three major pieces, and that would be, number one, define a common set of question and answers in this transaction that would allow generically to assure of the question, do you have an ESG plan and are you managing it well, right? However, you need to be more specific depending on the type of industry. So we architected a common set plus industry-specific Q&A around that, so that it could be applied in most businesses around the world. And finally, even though you may define a common set and industry-specific stuff, every business has its own internal processes and so on. And if you're looking at using this in that context, then there will always be some additional questions that's specific to that particular business, that specific company. So we architected this as a Q&A response mechanism around a set of common questions in three main areas. A common set of questions, an industry-specific set of questions, and a customized, allow the template to be customized to address any outlying questions that specific businesses may have. So as you know, we brought that together and created the first standard around that. Obviously, the next steps is to, open that up and work with our partners to make sure we refine that and make it applicable as widely as possible. So I expect we'll be getting into very specific use cases. And then, of course, what we need is the continuous improvement process. So as we work with more and more partners, we're going to learn some other things, right? So although we define some specific workflows, that I think will grow over time.
I wanted to turn it. Thank you, Andy. And yes, you sort of went on how the standard works across the customer and their suppliers. But Jacques, with your experience in global standards and so on, the second challenge or an equal challenge is to create a globally accepted standard. And maybe walk us a little bit. Andy already started to talk about how to engage the community, how to engage the partners of AKFI. Could you elaborate on this, Jacques, as part of the process?
Yeah, that's a very important thing, because at the end, standards are a voluntary process that people have to decide to use it or not. Okay, and one of the key things that is important in a standard is it's got to have value for the industry, and it's got to ideally solve one or more of their big problems, And I can see right now, from having read a lot of reports on ESG in various, annual reports of various companies, they all look very, very differently. It's very difficult to compare one with the other. Even when they talk about their carbon footprint, you're never totally sure what's included, what's excluded, how they counted it. It's getting very complicated, and if the standard organization don't get involved at one point in time, the government will get involved and define a lot of very hard rules on what they need to provide and how they need to provide it. The advantage of standards is that it's typically developed by committees made of members of the industry. So it's defined by the industry for the industry. And hopefully it becomes a consensus of that the industry can get behind and basically use it as the basic framework, as I mentioned before, to discuss about it. And that solves a lot of discussions and very complex discussion to be, okay, when you need to develop an RFI, for example, what do you ask? Okay, do I start from a blank sheet and start inventing questions? And then the person who receives it has to start inventing answers about, and not sure exactly what is meant by the different items in there, and how do I provide it? What level of details do they need, and all of those kind of things. What we found is when you have a standard, it kind of puts it makes all of those questions not moot, but at certain point, it defines like probably 90% of what is required. And at the end, there might be some questions about exactly what is meant, but you have a very strong base that you can work from. And for most of the industry, It's very, very important to have quick response time when you ask for information, and also have the company that have to respond have already most of the data on hand so they can reply quickly.
I thank you, and you both touch on the value for business, because really a standard has to bring value. And in the case of SRFI,
Yeah.
let's look maybe together on how is now, and you touch on that, Jack. Thank you. I'll go on that. Basically, you said every report looks differently, and these are only the reporting parts, which, by the way, are governed by standards. And now we are talking also about aligning strategies, SRFI, aligning, as Andy said, business practices. So now we have a plan to move from the current state to the future state. So in your vision, how the future state looks, maybe we continue, Jacques, and then we go back to Andy.
Well, I think this part is going to be evolving. So I see it being refined and refined over years, but we need a basic framework to start from. If we can get that, then we can all agree on what's important, okay, to report on, and also work with the various government and various countries to say, hey, if you use this, you already have a typical format that most of the industry has agreed, and they have the data to provide you, okay? Because I've seen in certain places where they're trying to put some regulations around it, that the industry is trying to figure out, how the hell do I get this data and how do I gather it? And it's not obvious. So you need to be able to define what is needed, how it is, and then work with the people to see how can we gather it. And it's got to not only be the perfect data, but it's got to be the best data that you can get that reflects what you want to achieve. Okay, and I think if we can get that, that would be really, really helpful. And then, as with every standard in the world, especially for new things like sustainability, this thing will be evolving, and getting more mature with the years, and figuring out what can be done, what cannot be done, what we missed, what we don't need anymore, and make it better and better all the time.
I'll add, and I'll switch to Andy in a second, but I will add that actually, if I look from 10,000-foot view at the standards, they started with the assumption that the data is there, as opposed to starting with the question of how do you get there before you can actually use the data. But I'll turn it to Andy to also listen what, how value can be added and the place of the standard with this change.
Yeah, and just to reinforce something that Jacques mentioned is I think back probably a couple of decades in some of the early technology work we did, especially in the telecommunications industries. There are so many different standards bodies around the world, so many different national regulations and so on, that grew up completely independently, right? And it was a real challenge to try and bring together those as global standards through CCITT and other bodies. And it was a real challenge and took many, many years. And it's much easier these days. So with a fairly new topic that's fairly greenfield, something around ESG, I think we have a great opportunity to use this framework to the benefit of not only the businesses that use it, but it will be a benefit to the regulators and the national bodies that, if there were no framework at all, may develop something completely different and maybe dislocated from business reality, because the business reality is today, most businesses are global. Whether you're a technology company, whether you're manufacturing tires or making textiles or rubber products or into mining and so on. All these businesses require sourcing from all over the world, need to ensure that there are best practices in human resources and materials management, et cetera, as well as the actual products and services at the end of that chain. And so I think we've got a real value here in putting this framework together, while some of these standards and reporting requirements are fairly new. And I think there's opportunities to standardize those as well. So having a framework like the actionable ESG framework is extremely important. And having reinforced what Jacques said, I've got to admit, Manuel, I forgot what your next question was.
No, actually, I was reflecting already on the next question. No, you covered pretty well the value of the standards. But the next question, and I'm really happy you brought the telecom, since we both, all three of us actually have a solid telecom background, I shall say, working in the industry. And two things to notice about telecoms: phone calls and messages and WhatsApp and so on, and work universally. They work across barriers, across companies. Sometimes you need a VPN because some countries raise an artificial border. But at the end, we very successful in doing communication standards, and this is in part SRFI is model after this thinking, where before you start to exchange information, you have to signal to the other party what information you need, how you need it formatted, before you can start actually to a conversation or a phone call or a set of messages or emails. So this principle is actually key to SRFI. We are setting the information transfer elements before we actually initiate the transfer of data and in details and strategies and so on. And no, thank you both for bringing this forward in the value of the. But we need to look a little bit from the supply chain, because I think the value is not only to the customers of the suppliers, but the supply chain themselves. How do you see the value being there when they have a standard, an agreed upon standard by the industry on how to exchange information? So, Andy, do you want to take this one first?